I'm talking about coursework. Coursework is
mad, creative.
Of course, they're the obvious ones.
Long.
Engaging or exciting.
You want one word? More words?
Boring.
Marking. Saying no lots of times.
Practicals. High energy, high quality.
Deadlines.
Skills.
coursework is really, really important. It's fundamental.
We use the exam board assessment criteria with the students constantly.
All the time, yeah. We share the criteria with the students all the time.
So we tend to sort of translate it for them first of all, get our heads around it, because sometimes we have a trouble accessing the criteria or the wording of it or interpreting it.
They have to know the difference between precise and accurate.
Reliability of conclusion.
We've simplified it into pupil language, and then we use that to give to pupils so that pupils can then check how well they're doing against the criteria that's been set by the exam board, but in a language that's actually something they can relate to.
Because at the end of the day, if they're being assessed on it, we want them to have it as part of their everyday vocabulary.
We produce an online version with exemplar piece of work, and we've hyperlinked it to the Walls of the Mark scheme that we've produced in pupil version. And then we give that copy of pupil version mark scheme to every pupil before they do the coursework.
We use it for formative assessment, we use it for peer assessment, we use it with self-assessment.
I'll also give them an answer that I've written that can be criticised. It's very much a borderline answer. And I'll ask the pupils to level this piece of work, and then I'll ask them to mark the piece of work. And I'll also ask them to write comments on how this piece of work can be improved to reach the next level.
Relating the assessment criteria to work up on the walls is also important. Say, well, look, this is what the assessment criteria says. That's how it translates. You know, you don't have to sit... Sorry.
I don't know what that is.
Controlled conditions, there's supposed to be controlled conditions at the moment.
In science, controlled conditions basically mean ensuring that everybody does the ISA at the same time.
We might do controlled assessment for a final piece. We might do controlled assessment for an art history that relates to a final piece. We might do controlled assessment on an observation drawing.
Everything has to be logged in terms of the time that they spend on it, in terms of exactly precisely what support they've got. So it's very much more independent.
Throughout the coursework, we're pushing them to, you know, rather than asking every time you get stuck, rely on yourself more. So when they're in that position of not being able to necessarily ask for help, they can rely on themselves, and they you know, still achieve without making an awful mess.
Supposed to make sure that it's all done in the classroom, but it's creating all sorts of problems because of photography. You set a project to do with snowmen or something, I don't know, whatever it is, or bridges. There aren't any bridges in school, so...
I think the kids probably benefit from it because they don't have coursework overload.
The history department in this school has a reputation of being very strict with deadlines.
It would be very easy to let deadlines slip.
A couple of years ago, we had one big deadline, which was Easter. And both teachers and students, it was badly managed, and it reflected in our outcomes. And what we do now, we have mini deadlines.
We have lots of deadlines, strict deadlines. If the work's in here, we mark it here. Then you get it back, then you add to it, then it's back in here.
All pupils are given a 2-week period after the end of their set allocated time to hand in coursework. And then the teachers then speak to the pupils and we send a letter home.
The students need to be clear of it. We repeat it a lot. You feel like a broken record, but eventually the dates do go in.
If we can get the first deadline, be really firm with that, and then at least we can photocopy their first drafts if we never get their final drafts in.
It has meant a few times we've sent incomplete coursework for children. Not many, but it has meant that.
It's my responsibility to make sure that the whole cohort have met the coursework deadline by the end of year 10. And so you'll often find me chasing students for their coursework, looking like a mad woman down the corridor.
It's always, oh miss, my book was built into the wall during the extension, or
It's got wet.
The dog ate my coursework.
the dog chewed it.
The dog's eaten it.
Ridiculous.
One of the best ones, I was on holiday.
They're all awful. None of them are in any way thought through.
If you stick to the tough rules, message gets round in the playground, and we really don't have an issue. We do have all of the coursework handed in. This year we've got 100% coursework handed in on time.
Strategies for feedback.
They get lots of feedback all the way through.
I think it's nice to make feedback quite funny and humorous, and I'll pick out funny lines or give them statistics.
We always have 2 stars and a wish at GCSE, so 2 really good things that they've achieved and a target for improvement.
Recently I had the longest sentence was 169 words.
They get marks, they get 1-to-1, they get lots of yellow post-its in their books.
At the beginning it had the reverse effect because they all wanted the title of having the record for the longest sentence, etc. But then it does eventually have an effect that they realise that they're not going to get any credit for writing ridiculously long sentences without the punctuation.
In the middle of a lesson we'll stop and everyone will walk around the room and look at everyone else's work.
So pupils get feedback from each other to help them understand how to improve their particular work.
I'll have a discussion with students, sit down at a table, sit down and talk about their coursework, but then I'll get them to write down what they've got to improve, because it takes the onus from me to them.
And so they're constantly in that habit of feeling comfortable, being critical of themselves and other people.
It's a tricky one, really.
It's an art rather than a science, I found.
From my experience, it's about 1 to 2% that actually don't require some interventionist teaching. That if I was never around, they'd still come out with an A. But that makes 98% that need some sort of strong interventionist teaching.
Yeah, we intervene all the time.
For a lot of pupils, it's confidence rather than anything else. So intervention can mean a chat. It could be an informal chat about the ability of the child.
My strategy is often quite powerful, intense lead-in, lots of resources, lots of telling them what to do, lots of help, and then I stand back from it, maybe for 2 or 3 lessons, just helping individuals, and in some ways letting them fail.
If in table tennis they can't do a forehand shot, you may want to suggest that they come after school to the club, and then you could set up a robot and they can have an extended 20 minutes practice, and therefore you could actually hold their hand in position and move it into position and say this is the correct technique.
I don't feel you can hold the hand every step of the way.
I think we draw the line when, you know, we find ourselves almost writing sometimes for the students. We sort of have to stop and say, no, actually this is your work.
Marking.
Marking is like a swear word in the department.
Pain in the arse.
I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves in terms of we give the students feedback weekly.
We have 2 different exercise books for them. So in a very practical sense, we can take their coursework books and hold on to them for as long as we need to.
Every task you set has got some kind of skill attached to it.
As I'm marking, I'm thinking of it as a final draft, so that I've got some idea of what grade it is already and what's missing.
You need to make sure that when you're marking that you're aware of that skill and you're not marking necessarily for spelling, punctuation and grammar, as opposed to the reading side of the task.
We mark each individual ISA assessment ourselves, so the class teacher would mark it, and then we do some moderation.
And we can use faculty meetings to sort of bring 5 pieces along, exchange them.
I think brutal honesty is our kind of policy on where to pitch the marking. There are individuals that, you know, you think, will they cope if they get a D? But if they can't cope getting a D from me, how will they cope getting a D in that envelope in the summer?
plagiarism.
It is a problem.
Pupils beg me to do their work for them.
The most common one is where they've taken photographs for a project and you spot the same photograph in one room as the other, so you know one of them's taken the photograph.
What I tend to do is sit down with the student and ask them what the word that they've used means.
But sometimes they're really silly and they do it and they don't try and cover it up.
And frankly, if Auntie Flo has done a drawing and they've brought it in, you're going to know, because it's not their style of drawing. It's normally better. 9 out of 10 times they won't be able to tell you the definition. And so you have to say, you know, I don't believe this is your work.
Who's helped you?
If they try and tell you it is, then ask them to come in at lunchtime and do a drawing the same in front of you.
It's really, really hard, plagiarism in science, because pupils are encouraged for certain pieces of coursework, like the case study, to go and extract information from other people's work.
Well, thank goodness for the internet, and I know the students probably say exactly the same thing when they're at home trying to write a piece of coursework and they decide they might want to plagiarise, but it's good for us too.
If we think that there's a problem with the grammar, so the grammar changed from one thing to another, we just have a little search on Google.
And I think modelling for the students in the classroom that here I am, here's a piece of coursework, I'm going to type in this word, look what comes up. It's the very first entry on there, it's not difficult. Exam boards won't find it difficult, and these are the consequences.
We cannot allow them the full justification for referencing, so they actually do lose some marks.
Your coursework will be thrown in the bin.
I think the point of coursework, it's about learning and it's about progress.
Science is a practical based subject, it always has been, always will be.
The coursework is where the skills and techniques are learnt, either conceptual skills or the practical skills.
An exam paper doesn't measure how well you can pour things into measures, into how well you can collect your data.
It offers the journey, the progression, the experience.
I think coursework also helps teachers to remain accountable as well, because then we can actually see where they could go.
Unfortunately, it's become the most important part of the journey when it's not really. It should be, it's like a mountaineer climbing, always focusing on the peak and forgetting the path. Shouldn't be the case. You should focus on the path and around you. You will get to the peak.
So what not to do?
Something that I would definitely not do is
When we first did the ICEs, we tried to do too many.
try and kill yourself giving too much feedback.
And we tried doing sort of, 4 or 5, which was ridiculous to manage.
A, they don't always, read everything that you've written, and B, is their own work.
So now we just do maybe a couple and we do them well.
Do you want to carry on?
Any time where we've thought to ourselves, you know what, maybe we can get a few more C's if we just get everyone to do the shell drawing, that's when it's gone wrong, because suddenly the students are no longer excited by what they're doing. They're finding it the same as a subject where the answer is set and they're either wrong or right.
Cut.
Is that it?